Hey everyone, today we have a real treat. We get to sit down with the folks who created the trust and safety team at Airbnb. Today everyone knows that Airbnb is a multi-billion-dollar marketplace that has brought together people from all over the world who didn't know each other, and they could do it based on the trust and safety methods that were developed by these founders. Steve Kirkham and Eric Levine were the folks who created that team, and today they work on Berbix, an instant identity verification service. Yes, it can spot fake IDs. They have a pure software solution that's instant, that is near zero marginal cost. That's a really big deal because if you know who you're doing business with, you can do a lot more of that business on the internet. This is a really powerful idea that will power an entire new generation of online marketplace. We're gonna learn a lot about fighting bad people on the internet. Let's get started. One of the things that has been amazing in my time getting to know you guys is both of you are such experts in terms of trust and safety, period. Walk me through, as early members of the Airbnb trust and safety team, what was that like?
We'll have to rewind to 2012. I mean, I came in as one of the first product managers onto the kind of first proactive trust and safety efforts at the company. And of course, Airbnb had this kind of infamous incident in the summer of 2011 when a host's house here in the Bay Area unfortunately got vandalized. And that certainly got into motion at the company, the need to kind of staff up a special operations team to kind of respond to bad activities as they occur. But then there was this need, quickly thereafter to get a little bit more proactive. So my starting state was a full-time engineer, a half of a data scientist, and an already signed contract with Jumio, who was one of the identity verification providers at the time. And I spent kind of the first few months there pulling together and launching what was known as Verified ID, a feature on Airbnb.com that takes a bit of an online presence and tries to attach it or corroborate that with an offline presence, most notably a photo ID, to kind of prove, are you who you say you are?
And then is that about the time you met Eric?
About the time I met Eric.
Yeah, so I ended up joining the trust and safety team about a little under 1 year into my tenure at Airbnb. Was always attracted to things that were the highest priority, highest impact things that I could work on. Turns out that trust and safety, there was a lot of need and a lot of challenges there. Ended up joining forces with Steve a little bit into that tenure and built out a lot of the early machine learning systems that we used for trying to detect fraudulent behavior. Had a happy relationship from there forward, trying to stop bad actors together.
Earlier you were mentioning the verification process that was really sort of core to Airbnb, and that's how you knew who you were doing business with. This was a new type of offline marketplace, so the verification piece actually enabled that.
You have a bunch of well-known online fraud that was not necessarily solved, but the playbook was written through the late 90s and 2000s. This is, chargeback risk, account takeovers, potentially even like certain scams. And it's not like we have a good handle on these even today in 2020, but there's certain things you do as you scale as an organization, and there's certain protections you put in place to mitigate those sorts of risks. But there was no playbook for offline risk.
Yeah, you had to write
And that's, of course, where Airbnb's kind of core user experience actually occurred. It wasn't Airbnb.com, it was in homes around the world. And that's where, tying together this notion, it just increased the importance of actually answering the question, who is on the other side of the screen? Who is actually touching that screen, or who's actually typing on that keyboard?
Yeah, Airbnb is fundamentally built on trust, right? You're not going to have someone staying in your home if you don't trust that there's some amount of vetting or verification processes happening behind the scenes, because you have no idea who might be showing up. And so this is really the sort of core piece of technology that enabled the Airbnb experience to work successfully, is ensuring that people had this level of trust that they could put their faith in Airbnb trying to stop a lot of these bad actors. And there would have been a lot more bad actors on the platform if not for a lot of the efforts that we did to proactively stop those or reactively react to situations as they occurred.
You were mentioning one of the proudest moments for both of you was to figure out what the fraudsters were really trying to do and then preventing them from doing that thing. What was the top example for that?
One of the key principles on the trust and safety team that we tried to abide by was really trying to understand the motivations for the bad actors that were attacking the platform, attacking the users, and trying to defraud in one way or another. And that was to really understand the different types of motivations. By far, the most common motivation that we found was a financial one. Bad actors are financially motivated. They are essentially running a business, even if it's an illegal business, and they are trying to take money out of a system. For Airbnb, there are a lot of ways one could imagine trying to extract money from that system. One of the most common ways is to you could imagine in an account takeover sort of situation. Let's say a host with a high value property has their account taken over by a phishing or spear phishing attack, and the payout information is changed to some bad actor's bank account information. You could imagine that a lot of actual money could change hands, be extracted from the system in that way. And so
those damn thieves, damn thieves coming in.
So a lot of our efforts were to, in this particular arena, were to try to figure out ways that we could actually stop people from changing those payout information to some illicit payout system.
Yeah, so certainly the importance of protecting when money is either coming in or going out of a particular system is kind of paramount. And there's a bunch of like common practices that banks have always had to put in place, but that gets a lot more difficult when you're dealing with, consumer marketplaces. Why? Because you have near unfettered access where it's so easy to sign up for an account. It's so easy to be able to potentially even spearfish another consumer on that platform. There's some basic protection ones needs to kind of put into place, because you're not just answering the question, are you who you say you are? You're answering that question kind of over time. Are you still who you said you were?
Right now, when you're changing the bank account to Nigeria.
Precisely. And that's what's so important, to be able to have a very high, reliable and a very high accurate tool or means by which to re-ask and re-answer that same question for the most sensitive of actions. And one would be considerable money is changing hands.
I think one of the interesting things here is that the way people figure out if you're who you say you are is IDs, but then it's an offline process. They sort of throw it to Mechanical Turk or the equivalent of that, and you basically kind of have like a bar bouncer holding up the ID and making sure that, oh, is that for real? But people use fakes all the time, and over a webcam or over an image that's uploaded, how are you actually going to figure that out? And that's something that you guys have actually solved.
Yeah, and it's actually was one of the biggest pain points we had during our time at Airbnb, where we were working with a number of different vendors, and we actually went out to the market and did a multi-vendor approach halfway through our tenure there, and really went out to try to find a vendor that could reliably check an ID in a virtual environment. And unfortunately, what we found is, you're right, Gary, a lot of those legacy providers out there have effectively tried to mimic an in-person ID check. And they quite literally take images of an ID and then outsource. They have teams of hundreds or thousands of folks that will review those IDs. And that waiting period, that delay until Airbnb got an answer, was incredibly frustrating, not just to us as a platform, but of course to our guests and hosts, which are sitting there wondering, okay, is this good or is this bad?
Yeah. So Berbix is your software, right? So
precisely, and that's really the inspiration to founding Berbix. Was we literally built the company we wish would have existed when we both started at Airbnb back in 2012.
Even this scenario of when you change the bank account, when you're trying to get money out, can you do a verification in that moment, real time? And that's something that you probably wish you could have done, and you probably could do some form of it in the past. It just wasn't quite right.
Especially when you have such sensitive actions like changing the bank account information. If we were to check someone's ID and it came back as an inconclusive, and we had to ask that host to come back and try again, there's so many challenges that occur when you have this asynchronous verification process where you can't actually, you have to put users into these weird purgatory situations where you're not sure if you can trust them, you're not sure if you can't, because you can't get an answer immediately, and you have to be able to roll back any changes that were made during that time. It adds a lot of technical complexity to a system that could otherwise be a lot simpler with the sort of automated instant verification processes that we put our stake in the ground on at Berbix.
Yeah, and to make matters worse, what effectively was happening is even though those providers were taking minutes, sometimes an hour to get a response back to the platform, when that response came back, they were still making mistakes and sometimes pretty blatant, obvious, and frustrating mistakes. And that's where when Eric and I, set out to found Berbix, we put a stake in the ground from day one. Fully automated ID checks. We cannot have a human in the loop. Our customers need to get an instant response each and every time. And that's exactly what we built from the ground up, and able to actually detect fake IDs in real time better than even the legacy providers that are using humans to manually review these.
There are just so many interesting new use cases that are enabled that basically you couldn't do. For instance, you could imagine a social network that would never have real name trolling because you could actually verify that those were real people. Or you're seeing this across every type of offline and online marketplace. There's just so many more that could exist now that Berbix exists.
You're right, Gary. And what we've really done here is you shouldn't even think about us as an identity verification provider or one that checks IDs. We do that. But the value we actually provide to platforms is the ability to enforce uniqueness in the real physical world. And that's what's so important, is the ability to have a one-to-one relationship between a virtual account on a platform and a real bona fide individual in the actual physical world. And that's very much where a lot of the social media platforms have really fallen down, as you can have a single person in the real world controlling tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of handles out there. And that's where a lot of things start breaking down.
Yeah, in crypto, we call this Sybil resistance, and it's pretty fundamental, actually.
Precisely.
Zooming out a little bit, I'd love to talk about, a lot of the people who are watching this are trying to work on their own startups and trying to start new marketplaces. They might have to start a trust and safety team. I wonder, when should they think about starting that process?
Yeah, yesterday would be my quippy answer to that question.
Totally.
And certainly not necessarily building a trust and safety team, but thinking about what you're building through a trust and safety lens. And this is what was so fundamentally important, and something that we kind of learned by trying and failing a bunch of times while at Airbnb, which is putting yourselves in the shoes of the very bad actors that either today or tomorrow will likely attempt to do something bad in your platform. And again, as Eric already alluded to, certainly at our time at Airbnb, and if you just look at the fraud ecosystem in general, money typically drives the vast majority, but not all, of the kind of fraud vectors out there. So putting yourself in the shoes of how might somebody extract value from either me, my business, or worse yet, those users on my particular platform.
Eric, sounds like there are a bunch of different types of bad actors that you've run across in your time.
Yeah, there certainly are. I can sort of enumerate some of those. There's, of course, you have your premeditated bad actors. These are people who come to your platform with the explicit intent to cause harm, extract money, or do something knowingly fraudulent.
Man, jerks.
Then you have your opportunistic bad actors. You can imagine, if you're staying at Airbnb or something, and you see a wad of cash on a nightstand or something, and you decide to swipe it in the heat of the moment because you don't think you're going to get caught. These are not people who come to your platform with the intent to cause any sort of harm per se, but they cause harm nonetheless because they think that they can get away with it. So those are the first two distinct categories. And the third category is an accidental bad actor. These are usually people who just don't understand the actual standards and expectations of a platform, do something in violation of that, and maybe causing harm inadvertently to other users or themselves in the process. And so you really need to think about these different bad actors in very different lenses and think about the ways that you can mitigate the harm that they can cause.
Those are the ones who say sorry. They're like,
exactly.
whoa, sorry, didn't mean to do that.
That's right.
And that's what's so interesting, right? Whereas premeditated bad actors, they have a bit of a signature, right? Because they, as Eric alluded to beforehand, they're almost running a business, right? So it's they're trying to maximize their return on investment. What is their investment? Well, it's their time and energy, and the return is extracting money, right? That's a very basic thing about how fraud works.
Yeah, you want to drive their return on investment to negative, right? You don't want them to be able to actually extract value from the fraud that they're engaging in.
The next question that everyone wants to know is, how do you actually stop them?
And so what's so interesting about this is when you think about these different types of bad actors, you have these premeditated ones that, as Eric alluded to, are really operating businesses, right? They're trying to maximize ROI. Their investment is their time and energy, and the return is monetary. So what you want to do is you want to waste more of their time and energy, or decrease or try to cut off the return they're getting. And what's so interesting is that's where certain types of friction, like even an ID check, can actually dissuade or otherwise encourage bad actors to follow the path of least resistance and go to fraud a platform with far fewer protections.
You know what Paul Graham did once with Hacker News? He actually created a super slow server just for trolls and people who were trying to hack Hacker News, and he would just feed the data back super slowly. And it's just like, it was like wading through mud, basically, for someone who, you know, he would hellban them and then throw them on the super slow server. And that was exactly what you were saying. Like, if you just make it much more difficult and much slower to mess with you, they'll just go someplace else.
Exactly. But then you also have the opportunistic bad actors, as Eric pointed out. Now, those are a lot tougher to catch ahead of time, right? Because they act, there's no malicious intent ahead of time, right? They act as any accidental or typical person would act. But then they do something opportunistic and they violate the standards and expectations of a particular platform. Let's say, for example, you as a platform wanted to ensure that person doesn't come back. They're no longer invited to participate in that community or on that platform. You'd want to prevent them from coming back a second time. This is, again, where enforcing uniqueness is so key, because you want to keep the same bad actors, be them premeditated or potentially opportunistic, away from your platform, or at least know when they're signing back up again. Now, that's where banning something like an email address or phone number only gets you so far. You need something much more unique that ties an individual to who they are in the real physical world to be able to mitigate risk at scale.
Yeah, and I'll add for those opportunistic bad actors, a large part of the motivation of those people is that they believe that they will not get caught or that there will be no consequences for the bad activity that they do. That's a big part of the reason why you want to do something like some identity verification where you can ban someone from your platform, because you don't want them to be coming back. Second, having something like a government issued photo ID, if they're breaking a law, like you could potentially, follow up with law enforcement in those cases in order to make sure that they understand that there is potentially some consequences for those sorts of bad activities that are actually illegal. And then for the actual accidental bad actors, given that they're the ones who say sorry, really what you want to do is you want to clearly convey the standards and expectations of your platform so that people know that they're doing something wrong when they're doing something wrong, and that it's not just purely people not understanding what's expected of them.
Where can people find you if they want to ask you questions about their own trust and safety headaches?
Please check out our website at Berbix.com. You can see there the kind of first product that we've built based on all of the trial and tribulations, building proactive trust and safety at Airbnb. And feel free to reach out to either of us. Steve at Berbix.com.
And I'm at Eric at Berbix.com. ERIC.
So a lot of people who are watching my YouTube channel are actually just starting out in their careers, and for me, it's like hard to believe I'm 39 now and, I've been writing code for a while, and I don't know, I kind of miss those days just starting out. What sort of advice would you have for the 19, 20, 22-year-old version of yourselves just starting out, starting off your career? What are some things that you learned along the way while, building such an important thing at Airbnb and then now building your own startup?
Yeah, so for me, I think the biggest lesson I would give 20-year-old Eric is that a lot of times you're not going to really get permission to do the things that are the most important and the most impactful. And that a lot of times people need to own their own impact to find those opportunities for really driving the changes that they want to see within their organization or elsewhere. And that a lot of times you just need to go and do it. And certainly 20-year-old Eric coming out of a very on rails life of, high school, college, even my early time when I was at Google prior to joining Airbnb, I felt like a lot of the next things were fairly spoon fed to me, and that, joining a company like Airbnb in the early days, and then of course, starting a company, nobody's going to tell you what to do. Nobody's going to really have a good sense for the best things for you to be working on at any given time. And so you really have to own your own impact.
That's awesome.
And similarly, I'd probably tell 20-year-old Steve that imposter syndrome is real.
Yeah.
To be very blunt, right? Like,
I feel that.
Similar to kind of Eric, it's like it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission and just having to do. A lot of times it's internal struggles as opposed to external pressures that kind of give you some hesitance as to, oh, am I able to do that? Surely there's smarter people than me here. Like, well, yeah, there could be, but that doesn't mean that you won't be just as successful as they are. And that's probably one of the lessons that I very deeply appreciate trying to give to those younger than me, that imposter syndrome is real. Read the Wikipedia article on it, and there's countless great resources online now in 2020 to kind of help change those mental models if that's something that you struggle with.
Yeah, I think people ask themselves, hey, you know, it feels like I'm kind of making it up as I go. Is that normal? And the answer is yes. Everyone's making it up, right? But the cool thing is you get to make it up. So, I mean, that's the empowering
And that's the
awesome
great thing about being founders.
Yeah, you know it. Guys, Steve, Eric, thank you so much for sitting down with me. And I feel like every time I talk to you, I learn more about these software systems that we get to build. Being able to verify who you think you're talking to actually is that person through a web browser, through a mobile experience, that's like table stakes. That's, you know, a fundamental building block of what we're trying to do. You know, people say software eating the world. You can't eat without knowing who's on the other end. So that's
absolutely, and that's gotten even more important in the current worldwide situation that we're in, with that many more interactions actually happening remotely.
Yeah, guys, thank you for building one of the building blocks of the internet. So really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Garry.
Yes, thank you, Garry. This is great.